Welcome to Ancient Geeks, a podcast from a couple of geeks of a certain age. We look at the development of geek culture through the lenses of our youth, and as informed by decades of geekery, we were geek before it was chic. We have friends everywhere. I am your co-host, Stephen Taylor.
I am one of those friends and your co-host, Tom Grant.
Today on Ancient Geeks, we are looking at the TV series Andor from the perspective of original fans of Star Wars. And I'll get into what that means more in a moment, but let me ask, this week in geekery, Tom, what have you been doing geek-wise?
Well, I got interested. I kept seeing a Superman excerpt from some comic book over and over again. It was, Superman drawn so he looks like, from the comics, drawn so he looks like Christopher Reeve. And he's saving some aliens who are in the back of some sort of police vehicle. And the kind of the real core part of this is he says, "I'm for everyone, not just for humans, but for humans, aliens, and so forth." It seemed like a fairly obvious allegory. So I looked it up and I read. It was Action Comics 858, and then several issues after that. With the Legion of Superheroes, and I've never been a big Legion fan,
right?
But this particular story arc was terrific. I read that recently, and I strongly recommend it to people.
Excellent. So I don't have anything especially new and exciting to recommend. I've just been casting about, mostly preparing for various future episodes, more kaiju movies and comic books, trying to figure out what we want to say about, say, the upcoming Fantastic Four movie and things of that nature.
You're even getting the kaiju lingo down.
I'm trying.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm trying.
We'll make a G fan out of you.
That's right. So that's where we are. So what theme music would you propose for this episode if we could afford the license?
I would pick the guy in the tower hammering on the big piece of metal.
That works.
Which in the soundtrack album, he's listed as the Time Grappler.
That's what he's supposed to be called, yes.
I assume that's
totally cool.
Yeah, I know. I assume that's his job description, not his name.
Yeah, exactly. If it was his name, he'd be a Time Lord.
Yeah.
But in this case, yes, I think his job is in fact to be the Time Grappler. But that is, totally cool and an excellent choice.
It will be yours.
I will go with Neemos! Exclamation point. Of which I would pick either, and there's various versions of Neemos, right? I found one that actually isn't from the official soundtrack, the Season 2 Club mix by Jeremy Bronze on Spotify. But if we had to go from the actual soundtrack, I'll go with the Galaxy mix from Andor Season 1 by Nicholas Britell. There is a lot of music on Spotify and lots of versions of Neemos.
Yes. Yeah, which comes up more than once in the show.
Yes, it does. So, okay, so let me give you a little bit of sort of parameters of what we're doing here. So, again, obviously, on Ancient Geeks, we mostly have found ourselves talking about things from our past, but obviously the past and the present come together because, as we all know, time is a flat circle. But nonetheless, we thought it would be interesting to look at Andor from the point of view of original Star Wars fans, because obviously we've been Star Wars fans from practically day one. And plus, Andor is just so damn good. It requires, I think, some conversation. So it's also an awful lot to talk about. So I will point out that we're going to sort of break this down into a two-part episode. Part one, which is today, we're going to talk about the narrative arcs of the story, a little about character. And then in part two, we'll talk about how Rogue One fits into this conversation. And then we have a number of thematic questions that we would like to ask and discuss about the show and how it fits into Star Wars as a general matter. I will point out that this is a spoilerific discussion, which should be pretty obvious from what I've just described. If for some strange reason you have not watched Andor, I cannot recommend the show enough. Stop listening right now and go watch the program. We'll be here when you get back. It is, I think, and we'll talk more about this in part two, but I think this is one of the best TV shows I've seen in quite some time.
Absolutely.
And it really having little to do, that statement isn't about it being a genre property or a Star Wars property. It's just an excellent television program that I think someone who doesn't even like Star Wars could watch. But we'll talk about that more in part two.
Well, I'll say this.
Go right ahead.
This might be a little bit of a look ahead to our second episode, but if you like sort of interesting moral dramas, or you like the work of John le Carré or people like him who write uh, kind of spy stories for especially that really have mature themes, or there's a number of other potential comparisons. But I think that to your point that if you're not a Star Wars fan, you may still love this show. There are things that you have probably liked that are analogous to this. So without giving anything away,
Correct.
this is where you stop the podcast and go watch it. There are plenty of good reasons why, thematically and for other reasons, this is just a great show.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a student of certain kinds of history, whether it's histories of rebellion,
Mhm.
revolution, political uprisings, and authoritarianism, or you have political science interests, as Tom and I clearly do, then this show is also of great appeal,
Yeah.
I think. So, moving on to part one here, we're going to sort of go through the two seasons and the narrative arcs and talk about, I think, the things that struck us and that are important and that are worth delving into. I would point out that the show season one it covers 1 year of Cassian Andor's life, while season two covers the next 4 years of Cassian Andor's life. The original plan, as I understand it, actually was for this to be a 5 episode, 5 year or 5 season show. But the creator, Tony Gilroy, realized that if they did that, taking as long as it took to make each season, Diego Luna would be an old man and be kind of hard to play.
Yeah.
Hard to play a young rebel. And Tony Gilroy, who I believe is in his early 60s, it would be like the rest of his life would be dedicated to this
Mhm.
program,
Yeah.
perhaps
But she's
alone.
already been doing this for 10 years.
Yes, that's right. So that's that. And in re-reviewing the material, and I did not rewatch because I didn't have time, but I did kind of scrub through some episodes and look at some recaps and whatnot. And it really is striking when you compare the two because the pacing is different. I mean, there's still very exciting, fast-paced storytelling in the first season, but the second season really, really moves along because of this creative decision. But I think it worked. Did you ever thought about that whole aspect of the show before we talk about the individual stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know about that until after I watched probably 10 out of the 12 episodes in season two, and I didn't feel like it was like crazily compressed, the way that the last season of Game of Thrones was tragically hurried along too much, or the way that Babylon 5 was sort of rushed a little bit at the end. It
That's
seemed
true.
fine. The pacing seemed fine. It seemed like actually it felt like that was the plan, to kind of have these year-long chunks within season two.
Yeah, I think if you didn't know, there was no reason you would think that there was any kind of outside force changing the concept of the program. Um, I mean, there are a couple of things that I would like to have seen. I think the only storyline I think got a little short-circuited by that was Bix's storyline,
Yeah,
because clearly she was having some serious trouble at one point that clearly got resolved in some capacity, in a way that was not entirely on screen.
right.
But beyond that, I didn't feel cheated by any of the storylines in particular.
Well, and it seemed, to me like the pacing was just about right in the sense that, major historical events like this do take time to unfold.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So I think from the standpoint of verisimilitude, that it definitely worked to have these 1 year blocks in season two. Anyway, said enough about the pacing.
It just strikes me that verisimilitude could be a Star Wars name.
There it is.
Anyway, or actually, it kind of sounds like a Game of Thrones name now that I say it out loud. Anyway, so let's turn our attention to season one, and obviously we're not going to go point by point because this would be a very, very, very long episode. But still, um, season one, like season two, even though it is over a 1 year period, is basically broken down into 3 episode arcs, which I think is a very
Mhm.
effective way of telling the story. So that you get a good sub story within the larger story, but at a good pace, and that has these sort of the rising and falling action throughout the season, right? So I think we can probably talk about them in those three. Well, there's a little bit of variation in season one, but more or less 3 episode arcs. So episodes 1 through 3, which I would summarize simply as really the beginning of Cassian. First looking for his sister because we find out his
Mhm.
origin stories. He's from planet Canary, where the Imperials had clearly had a mining facility of some kind that they abandoned, and then the people that were left behind were kind of living in a semi-savage fashion, or at least a regressed fashion. And he's eventually rescued by Marva, uh, Marva Andor, and Clem Andor, who adopt him as their son. And he's looking for his sister. He's on Merlano 1, and he runs into a couple of thugs. Well, they're security guards. They're corpo security.
Hmm.
But I wanted to sort of talk about that for a minute because I felt like this encounter with these two overindulgent security guards. He ends up killing both of them because they try to stop him from leaving because they felt insulted by him in the bar when he was looking at the actually probably whorehouse
Right.
where he was looking for his sister. But what are your thoughts about that initial encounter that leads to his committing this crime that then leads to a series of events that we'll talk about more in a moment? But any thoughts about that opening scene and the way in which it sort of sets a certain tone?
Yeah, well, I think you see like sort of right away where this show is going. It's a great setup, at least in terms of saying, yes, it's set in the Star Wars universe, but this isn't the typical sort of Star Wars story. It almost had sort of like a cyberpunk feel to it
It did.
on Merlin on whatever number what was Merlin on.
Morlana 1. Come on
Morlina
now.
one. Oh man. So just listeners, we both made cheat sheets to get through
I'm
these
trying.
two episodes because there's so many planets, so many characters, and I've already forgotten one. So
Well, I only forgot part of one.
I'm part of one. Anyway, but you have the corrupt police. You have our protagonist. The name show is named after him. He's going to be the center of the whole show, even if you haven't seen Rogue One and know kind of his role in that particular movie that this show is leading up to. Anyway, that he murders these two policemen who are roughing him up, and anyway, that this is not like A New Hope the way that it started at
That's right.
all.
Well, yeah, it's you're right about the cyberpunk part. In fact, in some ways, it's reminiscent of maybe something like Blade Runner with all the rain
Yeah,
and whatnot and the lights.
yeah, the
But
huge buildings and
yes,
yeah,
I will say from the very beginning, it's quite clear that they spend a lot of money on this show because you're on
yeah,
this set. It's obviously not just filmed in front of the volume, which is still I think can be
hmm,
very impressive, but they're on real sets, and which is especially true on Ferrex. But um, I was struck from the very beginning because I'm quite cognizant, obviously, and we'll talk about this more in part two, but quite cognizant this is about an authoritarian regime on the rise.
yeah,
So you have these two guys who are basically private security. They work for this corporation that does this mining. There's some, there's not a whole lot of super exposition, but there's this discussion that these planets are not fully under imperial control. There's a word like affiliated planets or something like that.
yeah,
And this becomes relevant later in the season, but clearly they feel empowered, right? They're tough guys with guns, and they have
right,
whatever badge they have, and they feel like they can just harass people with, in this case, tragic results. And the realism of it all, where they get in the scuffle, and the one guy is killed on accident, but then Andor has no choice but basically either be taken in because the
hmm,
guy's growling and says he'll back him up. But we all know that if he gets taken in, he's toast.
right,
So he makes a choice and he shoots the guy. And this then creates this whole cascade of events. But and we go back to Ferrex and we meet a cast of characters. His mother Marva, his
hmm,
father has been killed. Apparently, we find over time that he was actually killed by Imperials and hung on Rick's Road for a relatively innocuous intervention in a conflict, not for being a full blown rebel. Which again, I
right,
think continues to sort of whether it's these corpo guys and their sort of tough guy attitude, whether what we find out about Clem later, and the various other story elements that start to suffuse this first season. We see the sort of creeping authoritarianism. And the basic bottom line is if we have the guns, we can do what we want. And it doesn't, nothing else really matters. It's not about justice, right? As
right,
we, again, to skip ahead, as I suspect we'll do some of, when he gets put into prison, it's because they just thought he looked suspicious,
right.
not because of any other good reason. But
And these are
Uh,
people on the lower rungs, right? So,
yes,
so
that's right.
so often with Star Wars and space opera in general, you're always starting out effectively with people who are in elite positions,
Right.
but the corporate goons and Andor are clearly not those types of characters. And we also see right away that, Andor, he's willing to murder somebody, right?
Yes,
His morality is not cut and dried the way that Luke Skywalker was.
that's right.
Yeah.
Or if they're going to kill people in Star Wars, it was dudes in white plastic armor that really can't. Are they really people? I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
And who were clearly bad and
that's
clearly
right.
out to kill them already. So it was, almost always self-defense.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Here
And
it was sort of self-defense, but he could have allowed himself to be arrested instead of killing somebody. I don't know. Anyway,
that's right. That's right. No, it kind of reminds me. I'm not to go off on a weird tangent, but well, there's two things that come to mind. One, this is in some ways a pre-echo of the first time we see him in Rogue One
yes.
because he kills an informant because he feels that's what he has to do. It also kind of reminds me of Walter White in the first season of Breaking Bad when they've got the drug dealer in the basement who basically
Yeah.
says, "Hey, let me go. I won't say anything." But he knows for various
Right.
reasons, what I won't get into, that just from what's happening on screen, that this is. I mean, you can't trust this guy. If you let him go, you're dead, and you
Right.
have to make this choice, and it's a terrible moral choice, and has implications both for Andor in the story, for Walter White in that story. But anyway,
Yeah, and this little moment encapsulated is what really happens almost every episode in the whole series. Like choices like
yes,
this
that's right.
that people have to face, really hard choices.
So, we get back to Ferrex and we meet a variety of characters. We meet Bix Colleen, who they clearly have a romantic past, although she's currently with a guy named Tim. His mother Marva Andor, the droid B2 Emo, which may be the most accurately named droid in all of Star Wars, but
Yeah, no subtlety there.
he's great. I think he's
Oh,
my
I love
favorite.
emo.
I mean, I don't think a droid's ever made me want to cry before, and B2 Emo has a couple of times when
Yes.
it's absolutely. So, and we also get introduced to Cyril Karn, who is a major player throughout this show, who at this point in time is a mid-level security guard within the corporation, who is a tryhard of epic
Hmm.
proportions, and
Yeah.
clearly the kind of person who likes authoritarianism. He likes order in a rather extreme kind of way, and what have you. And we also get introduced eventually to Luthen Rail, who is Bix's contact to purchase this item that Cassian has stolen at some point. I'm forgetting what it is, a star or something. It doesn't matter. It's important insofar as it gets the Empire's attention later and shows up in one of the. It's a Star Path unit. There it is. I can see my notes. But Luthen, who at this point we're not quite sure who he is or what he's up to, has been keeping his eye on Cassian Andor and knows that he wants to recruit him for something larger, right? And so, what would you say? And I'll put you on the spot. What would you say is the purpose narratively of these three episodes?
Well, I think certainly from just the most superficial level to show how Andor gets recruited into one part of the rebellion.
Hmm.
I think it starts to kind of show how the rebellion operates.
Hmm.
That Luthen is more interested in him than he is in the device,
Right.
and says that overtly in his meeting. I don't know. What else do you think the
So
purpose
yeah, I
was?
mean, it lays the foundation of certain of these key characters that become relevant for the entire season, in some ways for the entire show. It's the beginning of Cassian's transformation from he's almost presented as a somewhat ne'er-do-well who can't quite figure out what to do in his life. He's
Yeah.
clearly still haunted by his past, hence looking for his sister. And Marva complains, and Brasso, his friend, complains that he just needs to like go to work and stop worrying about all this stuff. But of course, the fact that he's committed this crime. In fact, I think at some point somebody asked him, what have you done now?" Which is
Hmm.
an indication that you've done something else. Plus, if he has his Star Path unit, he must have stolen it from somebody. So basically, he's a thief at this point, who's kind of drifting through life, but who has certain skills. A phrase that keeps coming up. Um, and then Luthen shows up, and then all hell breaks loose toward the end of the third. It was there's the one the scene in episode three where they escape from the corpos who are trying to capture them is
Hmm.
one of many superlative mini climaxes within the series. Right, there's a
Yeah.
great scene where they because again, even though Kurn and his goons have superior firepower, they're all kind of dumb.
Hmm.
They're certainly not as smart as they think they are, I think is a better
Yeah,
way to put it.
they're effectively, corporate rent-a-cops.
Yes. And Karn has clearly these delusions of grandeur. And there's some great acting toward the end, right? When they think they've caught them because they rigged this speeder to they send the
Right.
speeder out and they
Hmm.
they shoot it and like, oh, we got him. And there's some great scenes where first Karn looks very happy, and then all of a sudden Luthen and Cassie come out on a speeder bike, and then the other speeder blows up. And it's like,
Yeah.
it goes from triumph to, you know, ashes very quickly. And he knows he's screwed up big time at that point. And then this leads to Cassian at least being recruited for one mission, which goes into the next 3 episode arc.
Yeah. And I would add two things to the list of what this establishes in the first
Okay.
three episodes. So, Star Wars traditionally had planets that were distinguished by terrain. So you
Yes.
had the ice planet, the jungle planet, the desert planet. Here, it kind of feels like in this series that you distinguish planets by class. So
Okay.
Ferrix is sort of this definite working class place. They're working in these huge scrap yards to salvage whatever they can from old spaceships, old droids, old whatever that people have dumped on this planet. I think that's one thing it certainly establishes, and I think the other thing it establishes is right away, because you're seeing, just the kind of their first brush with the empire here, that like once like the harsh light of incipient authoritarianism gets cast on any place, including this planet, it's like everything looks a little different. It really kind of changes the way that you look at the people.
Hmm.
Can whom can you really trust? Both in terms of like who might have sympathies with the bad people, but also just like who knows how to kind of help you navigate through a situation that's becoming increasingly treacherous. Anyway, I think that's another thing that these first three episodes set up, that every place gets distorted by the Empire in one way or another.
Yes. I think that's excellent. Um, so what ends up happening, of course, is that uh, Cassian agrees to basically be a mercenary for a heist that's taking place on a planet called Aldani,
Hmm.
where they're going to. So this is episodes 4, 5, and 6, which is in some ways, at least that part of it is a heist movie, right? Where it's
Right.
partially kind of feels like the French Resistance or some kind of irregular
Hmm.
group who are going to go in. The Guns of Navarone, I guess, is a better
Yeah,
call,
that's a
right?
good one. Yeah.
um, where this sort of ragtag group of people who have individual skill sets are going to go in and attack this imperial base and steal payroll and escape during this celestial astrological not astrological
Astronomical.
astronomical pardon me event that's going to take place and get away with all this money. And we meet Vel, whose last name is escaping me, Vel Sartha, who is this rebel leader on the planet. So we see this cell, and we see various other characters that are involved at this point in time, including Karis Nimmick, who he ends up being the writer of this manifesto about the rebellion. He's the closest thing to sort of an ideologue that we see
Hmm.
in the rebellion. Arvel Skeen, Sintha Kaz, and a variety of other characters who played various significant roles in this heist. Also during this cycle, we get introduced to Deidre Miro and the ISB, which is basically the intelligence operation and major partagas of the Empire. It's an interesting contrast, I think, too, between the scruffy, dirty rebels and the
Mhm.
shiny, clean Imperials.
Yes.
And I'll take a side trip again as a doing the Ancient Geeks part of this is one of the things that struck me about this, and we may talk about it. We talk about it here. We talk about it more later. Is the way in which the sets and the sort of and I'm blank on the word that I really want here, but the general vibe, to use a less sophisticated word than the one that I want, of the sets and the scenes and whatnot, even in the original Star Wars, is able to be translated into the contemporary period in a way that doesn't look. It's obviously updated, but it's also there's more continuity than say between um, TOS, Star Trek, and even the movies later, or certainly the TV shows later,
Right.
right? And the way in which what I'm trying to say is this. So, by way of comparison, while I know there are fans who complained that Star Trek Discovery or Star Trek Strange New Worlds just looks too much better than TOS, and they actually
Mhm.
wanted them to make those look just like TOS, which would have been absurd, quite frankly, on a modern television.
Yeah.
But you just can't there you can't really port it over. You can do some things, but very few things. But with Star Wars, it is possible to make these modern shows that still look like they're set in the same places as the 1970s shows. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. Right. Yeah, because you have the like the Tandy or Amiga level, computers and
Yeah,
computer graphics.
the graphics do look a little out of, but they work though. But
Yeah,
the
you have
sets look like they still there's a continuity there.
yeah, yeah. You have this sort of like chunky looking, very functional aesthetic to a lot of places. I guess the on Aldani, the Imperial base was in real life as a dam somewhere in Spain.
Okay.
And just kind of this really interesting looking dam. And so anyway, it does translate, 'cause, not only because some of these are real places, but also the production design really captures the aesthetic perfectly. The equipment, the costumes, everything.
Yes. Yeah. No, I do know, and I've been meaning to look, and I haven't. Apparently there's some places online you can see the photos of the real places versus how they redid them with CGI and other set stuff,
Hmm.
set dressing to make it look like another place. I know a lot of Coruscant is real places,
Yeah.
but anyway. So the Aldani heist. Let's talk about that
Okay.
overall storyline. Then we can come back to maybe some other elements of this 3 episode arc. But I mean, it's a pretty straightforward thing. You get a rebel, you got the core rebel group. They're going to infiltrate this base. They have one guy on the inside who's going to help them. And there's this event that's going to take place that everyone wants to see, right? The Eye. This event, is it annual? I can't remember.
No, it's like every
That's
it's
right.
every several years. Yeah.
It's
7 years, 5 years, some
it's
interval like that.
yeah. It's longer than a year.
Hmm.
What I thought was kind of and also speaks I think, to the quality of the production, the writing, and the thoughtfulness of the show is the way in which all of the imperial, like the functionaries, the officers, they all want to see this thing. They're human beings, even though they're in
Right.
the empire. And
Hmm.
that, of course, is part of what helps this heist happen. Is everyone wants to be looking at the sky and not paying attention to what's going on here. It's kind of like it had the vibe of what's the 4th of July, and there's going to be a big fireworks display, and we kind of want to see it. And do we have to work that hard today? Can I have a hot dog and like chill out?
Right.
That's which they take advantage of. I was struck, maybe it was a little too on the nose, but it was sort of striking that the military commander of the base was too fat for his uniform. He'd gotten too, that
Yeah.
was maybe a little on the nose, but still, it struck me. But then the entire process and then the entire action of sort of infiltrating the base, coming in with the pilgrims and also disguised as Imperials. And I love the bit where they have to jump over the edge of the thing and Vel doesn't really want to do it, but she does it anyway.
Right.
That felt very, again, realistic in the sense that these are hard things to do. And,
Yes.
sure, it's nice when the heroes are all like, they're all Tom Cruise willing to do all the stunts
Hmm.
themselves. But I mean, this is hard stuff to do.
Yeah, the plan doesn't work perfectly.
That's right.
You
No, it
know,
does
there
not.
are various hitches throughout the course of this one particular episode.
A lot of people die on the way to the ship,
Hmm. Yep. Yep.
and they make it out barely with only four of them, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cassian, Nimic, Skeen, and Vel. And of course, Skeen ends up being a right bastard. And now I have a question about that scene. When I first saw that scene,
Hmm.
I thought Skeen was trying to test him. I thought it was like
Oh, I
a
did
test.
too. Yeah.
So I was surprised we just shot him.
Well, yeah, because, he's saying, well, we could just, take the money and run here.
Yes.
And again, I think this is showing just how complex the show really wants to make both the rebels and the Imperials. It's sort of
Hmm.
like The Wire in that sense.
Yeah.
That you show both sides having a sort of a spectrum of different types of people and shows the dysfunction, in both groups. In this case, that this guy really was in the end just in it for the money, even though he claimed otherwise at the beginning.
Yes. Yes. But I thought it was perhaps a little overconfident of Andor just to kill him. 'Cause, well,
Yeah. And then just explain, oh, I had to shoot him,
yeah, that's right.
he,
I'm
he was trying to rip us all off.
That's right.
I thought this was
So
also where we really got to see, our first kind of extended insight into the Empire as the show
yes.
was depicting
Yes.
it, and the base commander. You mentioned he's too fat. I mean, he really is sort of this extremely minor but interesting villain.
Yes.
He's a guy for whom, it's just all about, his comfort. Like he looks forward to digging into a fine table
That's right.
after the Celestial Light Show is finished. He's perfectly fine lying his ass off to the locals about what the Empire is going to be doing there in the long term.
Oh yeah.
He's fine with corrupting them. They're doing this pilgrimage up the mountain, and they've deliberately put these tempting way stations where people can get
That's right.
drunk, and they
That's right.
then they don't make it all the way to the sacred spot where all the native Aldanis are supposed to be. He's again, he's not a mustache twirling sort of villain. He's a guy just like he's looking forward to retirement,
Right.
probably, and he's not just sort of like these kind of inexplicably malevolent characters. Like kind of like Darth Vader and the original trilogy, like he was corrupted by the dark side, yada yada. He was sort of malevolence poured into the black armor.
Yes.
But at that time, we didn't have any backstory for him really much, and didn't need to. He's not that kind of villain, and you just see a lot of this kind of villains, like the base commander, who were, again, it kind of like adds to the realism of it.
No, I totally agree. I think that it's. I think one of the things that's striking about the story, and even the characters who are a bit more overtly evil, like Dedramira eventually. Well, not just in this, actually in this season, um, but it makes me think of the phrase "banality of evil," right?
Oh, definitely.
And the whole notion that a lot of what you're seeing and what we often do see in authoritarian regimes is it's not that everybody adheres to the official ideology or even has ideological motivations. It's just that this is a way to further my career, right? I mean, the
Right.
fat thing again, like, is a bit on the nose, but it is an indication that look, this guy's just enjoying life. He's enjoying his privilege, his position, his wife and his kid, and it's all just sort of about climbing the ladder. And the rest of it doesn't matter. And if we have to exploit the natives, so be it. We'll pat ourselves on the back for being clever about how we're doing that, and we'll just move forward. And the bosses get what they want, I get what I want, everything's fine.
Hmm.
And being in charge, it's like Mel Brooks. It's good to be the king, right? That's
Right.
what you get from this, which I think is interesting. I was going to say it about Ferrex, but you reminded me when you talked about the native Aldani. I think another thing that's interesting about Andor that often is not well done in other Star Wars is it's not just about the fact that planets are not all just mono monogeographical, monotopographical, whatever the word is, but they have cultures, right? They have, and the cultures are important to them. Ferrix has a distinct culture and important
Yes.
rituals that are important to them. The Aldani have something that's important to them. These are not just, you know, cookie cutter people that whose entirety of their existence is dictated by whether it's a desert planet or a swamp planet or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, the galaxy is a big and interesting place. I
That's
mean,
right.
this has been always my complaint about Star Wars after the first two movies, practically, and maybe the third, is that just the loss of an opportunity to explore the galaxy and the different characters in it, the different kinds of stories and so forth, versus just coming back to the same themes, motifs,
Oh,
characters, plots
can
over and
you
over again.
can you imagine how much better the Star Wars holiday special would have been if they had more than one planet than Tatooine to have their stupid jokes on? I mean, we could have had the Neemos thing. We could have had,
Oh,
jokes about the Aldani
you had to bring
and
up the holiday
sure.
special, didn't you?
Well, it's almost like the two opposite poles of Star Wars. There's the
Oh,
holiday
yes.
special on the one, and there's Andor on the other.
Yeah.
Um,
So can I
at
say
any
something
rate,
else about the base commander? I'm kind of oddly fixated. I'm finding on
please.
the base commander. So let's say you look at it like the structure of a an 80s action movie. Kind of the classic era of action movies, I would argue. So you would have villains, the minor villains would pop in. They would do something bad. I mean,
Yes,
they take a kid hostage, or
right.
they threaten to blow up a bank that they were robbing, and so forth. They'd say a couple of nasty things. You had like this very short time window in which you had to establish that they were somebody who deserved what they were going to get, and then the hero would come in, make some sort of quip, whether it was Arnold or Stallone or somebody, and then shoot them, right?
Sure.
So that was the story. It was all done very fast. So since
Yes.
every villain was really not developed, except for the main boss villain,
Right.
you just kind of had to keep the story going all the time. And it wasn't, I would say, it was a different sort of emotional satisfaction you got out of seeing, those minor villains dealt with. Here you have somebody you see a little bit longer, at least a couple of episodes, right? You see him in,
I believe so. Yeah.
yeah,
All these arcs run together, and I've not watched it enough to be able to place them in each individual episode, but I believe that is the case. Yes.
right. And so we get to see really just what a creep he is. None of what we were saying about he's going to retire or he just wants to get on with his life and so forth is to excuse, because he's being party to the corruption and destruction of the culture of this indigenous society. So like when he gets his comeuppance, it's a different
It's
feeling
more
of
satisfied.
satisfaction.
Yeah.
It's much more satisfying. It's not like it's not fast food satisfaction. It's a fine dinner satisfaction.
That's right. That's
When
right.
he's sweating, pushing the
Yes.
cart full
Yes.
of
Yes. Yes.
money, and then eventually has a heart attack because he's such a fat bastard.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a different feeling you get.
So, for any of the pedants in the audience who are yelling at us because we don't know, his name is Jehult Behaz. I'm not quite sure that's how you pronounce it because I don't remember.
No.
He's the commandant. He's mentioned in the Axe Forgets, which I guess would be episode 5, but he only appears in episode 6, The Eye.
Oh, okay. I thought he appeared a little bit in episode 5. Anyway, I think we should deliberately mispronounce his name just to drive people crazy.
Behaz.
Bay has
Behaz.
Bahaz.
Anyway, yeah, that's that. So yeah, I not to dwell on this too much more. I'll just maybe put a button on it and point out, yes, it is this really well developed aspect of the show that looks at the Empire more than just the Emperor and Vader and maybe someone like Grand Moff Tarkin. It's an organization, right? I think it's
Right.
actually not to say something about the entire series, but I kept half expecting either Vader or Palpatine to show up at some point at the very end of the first season.
Yeah.
I was pleased they didn't.
Oh, I
Um,
was so happy they didn't.
I mean, they mentioned Palpatine a couple of times. I know Vader doesn't get name checked at all, to my recollection. Um, and of course, we'll talk about Rogue One later, but it is I just thought it was useful to see the Empire as this broader thing than just the top of the pyramid.
Yeah. And it was still Star Wars. So I would say
Oh yeah.
both
Oh yeah.
episodes 1 to 3, that block, and episodes 4, 5, and 6, the second block, have their exciting moments. Whether it's
Oh,
the
absolutely.
high scene and the escape from Aldani, or it's the weird swinging chunks of rock, in episode 3, in
Mhm.
the place where Luthen and Cassian meet. I mean, it has all those sort of exciting moments.
Oh yes.
It's just the pacing's different,
Yes.
the mood is different. Anyway, just had to mention that it's not like it kind of completely departed from Star Wars in that respect.
No, not at all. So I think it's also worth pointing out that this set of episodes includes the, again, as I mentioned, but maybe we may want to talk about it. The introduction of Deidre Mira as one of these. I forget what their titles were, but they were all these individual members of the as ISB, this council. Well, this she was part of a group of individuals who were monitoring different sectors of Imperial space.
Mhm.
She was obsessed with from the beginning. She clearly is, pardon me. She's clearly smart, and she's put together that there's a pattern of technology being stolen.
Mhm.
So, which links to the Star Path device that I mentioned earlier, and she has this idea that some guy named Axis, who is the nexus point for all this stuff, which is Luthen, but she doesn't know that.
Yeah.
And so she's on the case here, and there is there is I now I'm not sure now. I thought I put it in my notes, but I put it somewhere else. There is this. I think this is in this episode where Partagas has the speech about what's our job, and then she
Right.
quotes from the ISB charter, and he's like, "That's right, but it's wrong." And it's a great bit where he talks about we're healthcare providers. We find germs,
Yes.
which I thought was a very interesting insight again into sort of the kind of intelligence capacity and focus that an authoritarian government of this scope, if not totalitarian government, has to have. Any thoughts about those characters?
Oh yeah. I mean, I just will amen what you said there, and also that is definitely what historically uh, authoritarians and fascists have said. I mean, they've looked at opposition as vermin,
Yes. Oh, yes.
germs, infestation, everything within that domain of really ugly metaphor.
Yes. And I will say that, and not just here, but in the entire show, I don't know that I've seen her anything, but Denise, I'm not going to say her name wrong, who,
Goth.
Goff, I don't know, who plays Deidre Miro, does an amazing job. Just the way she
Hmm.
holds her face and the kind of expressions she has, or it's just amazing.
Yeah.
And she does, on the one hand, kind of again here and elsewhere. She's clearly a climber. She's like this is her job. She wants to do a good job. She wants to be successful. Um, and in some ways, it's less about the evil of it all or the ideology of it all, and just so much as this is what my job is, and I want to be good at this.
Right.
Um, it's, I mean, it's quite disconcerting because we know these kind of people exist.
Hmm.
Um, even in contemporary politics. Anyway,
Yes.
I'll leave it aside for the moment, at least. Anything else about episodes 4 through 6 you wanted to mention?
No, I think that covers it. We got a lot more to talk about.
Um, I mean, there's stuff going on too in the background. I may have some of the timeline. It's worth mentioning. We get Cyril Karn gets sent back to Coruscant, and we meet his mother, who may be the most evil character of the entire show. Edie Karn.
Ah,
I'm sure we'll talk more about her in a bit. We also start to get the backstory of Mon Mothma. We know that she's connected with Luthen. We know that
mhm.
she's having money problems. We'll talk more about this in part two, but I think it's worth underscoring, right, that rebellions need elites to be involved and they need
Mhm.
cash. And so I think
Yeah.
that's an interesting part of this conversation as well. Um, so episode, speaking of the sort of callousness of authoritarianism and the arbitrary nature of quote unquote justice. Episode 7, we find Cassian on the runs. We actually see the planet Naimos, which is the inspiration of that hit tune, Neamos. And he gets arrested just because they think he's running away from some terrorist attack that took place, but he was just out for a morning walk and gets sentenced to 6 years in prison just because.
Yeah.
Thoughts about any of that stuff?
No, I mean, yeah, I think that again shows the arbitrariness of authoritarian systems, but also just doesn't necessarily have to be authoritarian, but
No.
that people run afoul of the police
Oh,
in a
yes.
lot of societies, including ours, in completely random and unfair ways. And it also like definitely. I mean, it's setting up some of the most interesting parts of the first season, but it also shows you're never really safe.
That's right. Well, I think it's the combination, I think, of yes, you can run afoul of law enforcement just because you look like the wrong kind of person, but then there's
Right.
clearly no due process.
Yeah.
And then he's sentenced.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
that's good that, like in Star Wars, I'll keep calling the first movie that ever came out Star Wars because that was its name when it came out. Anyway, so in Star Wars, it set up the Empire's bad. Luke's adoptive parents get killed in a horrific way, and they blow up a planet and so forth. But again, you don't really kind of see it except for Luke's story. What oppression does to ordinary people.
that's right.
That's not the focus. Because again, it's a different sort of movie. It's trying to
Of
keep
course.
things moving as fast as possible and so forth. And here, like one show after another, there's something there where it's just, people getting ground into the dirt for no good reason or having to make terrible choices for, because of the awfulness of the society they live in.
That's right. That's right. I mean, yeah, that's right. I'm going to avoid another digression. So let's shift to Narkina 5 and the prison storyline,
Mhm.
which is the next several episodes. This is a pretty terrifying prison
Yeah.
with the electrified floors and the heated floors and the fact that it's so the control was so complete at first that they don't even really need bars on the cells because if they step on the floor, it'll kill them. And when the floor is turned on,
Hmm.
all this kind of stuff. Um, what did you think about the prison itself beyond what I've just described?
Well, again, I think it shows both, as kind of an allegory, that this is what ultimately is the source of fear for
Right?
people, kind of being oppressed in authoritarian systems. But even, just, how awful prisons can be in general, how dehumanizing, how painful.
Yes.
I think that, that kind of that one revelation about that they're never getting out. They
Yes.
find out that their sentences will continue to be stretched out no matter what they do. That there is nothing, no good behavior, no time served, no nothing that can ever lead them to being manumitted from this horrible place. That was heart wrenching. That
Yes, it
when that
was.
revelation happened.
So yeah, as a general matter, right? The couple things that I thought were interesting beyond the sort of the technical aspect of the place, which was obviously they had semi-recruited, which happens in prisons. So the leaders within the prison group itself to be like sort of managers of the prisoners,
Hmm.
mostly on the promise that you're going to get either better treatment or released soon. So we get um, Kino Loy. Am I getting that right? Yes,
Yeah.
Kino Loy, Andy Serkis's character, who clearly at first is on board. He thinks things are working the way they're supposed to work. If we just, you get to the end of your sentence, you get to leave. They do pit different work groups against one another, right, for rewards, so that you got this sort of internal
Hmm.
competition thing going. But then, yes, there's this whole thing where they find out from one of these medical technicians that some of the prisoners realized that they just transferred one person to a different pod, and that therefore that meant no one was getting out. And they rebelled and they killed all these people to try to keep the story straight. And it's an interesting part of that development too that was great and just good filmmaking, good storytelling. which is that Cassian has already decided that that he'd rather try to find a way to fight and either die trying or to escape. And Kino Loy is not hearing it. He thinks that if they just keep doing what they're supposed to do, they're going to get out. And he asks at one point, and
Hmm.
how many guards are there to get any given point in time? And Kino Loy will not answer the question.
Right.
And then when they have that whole confrontation with the medical guy, and they realize, and it just dawns, there's this moment where you can and it's good acting, it's good directing, it's good writing, where it really is clear that Kino Loy is realizing what's going on. And at the very end of the middle episode of this arc, he asks how many guards Cassian does, and Loy tells him, and you can tell now
Right.
he's on board with this escape thing, right? Um, I also think it's worth noting because the name of that episode is Nobody's Listening. I think it's really sort of interesting, again, kind of a testament to how the technology was so oppressive in this prison that they didn't really listen to what the prisoners were saying. They didn't think they had to.
Yeah, they didn't care.
They didn't care, which allows them to make these plans that end up. But the whole heist, not heist, excuse me, the prison escape of all this was, I thought, thrilling and captivating and so well done. I was literally on the edge of my seat watching this. I don't
Yeah.
normally have that kind of reaction. But this show multiple times, the Ferrex climax was great. The escape and Aldani was fantastic. But this was just, I just was really riveted by this as basic filmmaking. What did you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, as basic filmmaking, I thought all the episodes in the
Yes.
prison were riveting. It was
Yes.
also something where I think you can't be playing around with your phone or iPad while
No.
you're watching it because,
No.
I mean, not only does it deserve your full attention because of how good it is, but also there were like things going on that you needed to see. Like
Yes.
where they're in those tubes connecting the work site to their barracks, and they're like doing hand signals across to the other sets of prisoners and other of those connecting tubes. As you mentioned, Andy Serkis, a lot of his facial
Hmm.
uh, uh, expressions were subtle and important.
Yes.
Anyway, it was absolutely riveting, and this sort of ingeniously and diabolical way designed prison.
Yes.
Um, my God, what a horrible place.
Yes.
And I don't know how you could be indifferent after watching this and getting kind of pulled into it about people who were in terrible prison conditions in the real world. But
That's right. That's right.
yeah,
One thing that I thought was really interesting and actually was narratively useful for understanding some of um, why they don't use droids for everything. But there's a point where they said that we're cheaper than droids.
oh yeah, yeah,
And I thought that was very interesting because, sure, why not just have robots build all this stuff? What do you need people for?
yeah.
But that the idea that sort of that they were less important than the machines for what they could do for the Empire was pretty chilling.
Right, exactly. I mean, that was true of the gulags too,
Yes.
right?
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
and other sort of work camps in history that were there ostensibly for one purpose, but really there again just to grind people into dust.
Yeah, not just in history. Unfortunately, there's a
Yeah,
terrible example within my home state where they lease prisoners out for practically nothing to businesses to do. It's pretty awful. But anyway,
yeah. So anyway, and just that again, that sense of constant dread being there, the
yes, yes,
arbitrariness in the prison, not inflicted again by mustache twirling villains,
no,
but just like these schlubs who are running
yeah,
the gulag.
it's their
Uh,
jobs.
yeah, it's just their jobs. When they finally take over the prison and they break into the control room, these guys are just quivering wrecks.
Yes,
They're not again, to kind of look at the 80s action movie comparison. They're not like the guys who would, the goons who would then sneer at the heroes.
right, right, right.
You rebel scum. That's not the reaction. It's like, oh, don't
No,
shoot me, or the
that's
guys who
right.
are
That's right.
hiding behind the
Yeah,
door.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
is
yeah. There was some great scenes of that.
yeah. Again,
Yeah,
not to
absolutely.
excuse anybody here at all,
No,
but
not at all. But I
yeah,
mean, it was well. The bottom line is, once you take away their technological edge, their torture machines, their weapons, they're just
right.
cowards. Which is what you. I mean, why would they not be? They're afraid. They're human beings.
Yeah.
but they were
How
willing
did
to
you?
exploit. Go ahead.
No, no, go ahead.
No, I was done.
So, what did you think about the reveal that they were building parts for the Death Star?
I had two sort of contradictory responses. I mean, one, I kind of thought maybe that's what they were doing in the first place, just because, why not? That it had to be something to do with the War Machine. So, while, of course, the Death Star is looming in the background, literally and figuratively. On one hand, it kind of felt maybe unnecessary.
Hmm.
What did you
Yeah,
think?
exactly. I mean, I was glad it tied into something that was central to the show, not random key jangling
Hmm.
about something else in the Star Wars universe.
Right.
If you found out that one of the prisoners there was Luke Skywalker's cousin, yeah, or Vader just popped
It was
into.
it was Jojo Darklighter, Biggs Darklighter's twin brother.
Yeah, or he was like Vader popped in to inspect the prison and so forth. Then I would have rolled my eyes and said, "Oh my God, this show is really blowing it." But the idea that really the show was really all about ultimately the development of the Death Star as the
Yes.
instrument of imperial oppression uh, made it meaningful, but I didn't need it. I didn't need it, and it did worry me a little bit because I didn't know how much of this was going to be about the Death Star. That
Hmm.
ultimately that was necessarily a good little post credit sequence there.
I mean, I will say this, right? I mean, there's not a whole lot of Easter eggs in this thing, which
Yeah,
is good actually.
yay.
So I didn't necessarily mind. I didn't mind it. I just didn't necessarily. I didn't have to have it, but it did. I mean, it served a broader purpose in the sense that yes, this is this thing looming in the background.
Yeah, well,
Um,
all the things that were are we might use the term Easter eggs. All the things that were callbacks to something, they were always something that was part of the story that they were telling. So, the part of you um, what's his name? So I'm blowing it here again with names. Saw Gerrera's
yes.
uh, rebel group, the guy with the hoses coming out of
Yeah.
his neck.
Two tubes.
Yeah, two tubes. But he was in Rogue One.
Yes.
This is all leading to Rogue One.
Yes.
He was part of Saw Gerrera's group in that movie. That's a callback. Like, okay, that makes sense. That's part of the story. It would be odd if this guy arbitrarily weren't there. But if you threw in, just some sort of random droid that we saw in one of the original Star Wars movies, just because, yeah, it has less of an impact on, at least on me.
No, I
Speaking
agree.
speaking for myself.
Yeah, speak for yourself, buddy. So yeah, a couple of things that are going on during this arc that we haven't that just need worth at least noting. One, this is Bix has been taken into custody because they're trying to find Cassian Andor, and she's tortured by Dr. Gorst, who,
Oh,
yeah,
oh.
yeah, exactly. You wanna explain your noise?
Well, just a weirdly cheery little technician.
Yes,
His it for him it really isn't about any enjoyment of the pain that he's inflicting. Like he's just come up with what he thinks is this cleverly designed device that takes the agonized sounds of children
yes,
and converts it into the most horrific psychological weapon you can imagine to torture people.
yes.
And he's like, well, da 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 da. You probably shouldn't. You probably shouldn't hide anything here because it's going to go really badly for you. And let me just explain what you're going about to listen to. Is this again? I go back to the banality of evil, which I think
Yes,
very, very, very aptly brought up. That these are the kinds of people who do come up with the torture devices, who do come
right.
up with the extreme interrogation techniques.
I just think
Uh,
it's cool. It's cool. Look what I can do.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's awful. Yeah, he was the worst. And then of course Deidre Mira is involved in this too, so she's revealing herself to be willing to go to pretty substantial extremes. We also see some backstory about Mon Mothma and her family. We really haven't talked a lot about Mon
Yeah.
Mothma, but she and her husband clearly don't get along. There's all these sort of references to Chandrilan traditions, which include arranged marriages, we find out, which
Mhm.
clearly is why she and Perrin don't fully get along. And her daughter is sort of cleaving to these ancient traditions that Mon Mothma doesn't really care for. That's all going on in the background at this point. And she's trying to also, there's this hint that she can get some money if she just introduces her daughter, who's a teenager, a young teenager, I forget,
Yeah.
13 years old at this point, to the son of this banker guy because he wants an arranged marriage. He says, "Oh, that's not what it is," but that's what it is. And it's all creeping her out and frustrating her, but that becomes relevant into season two.
Hmm.
Anything else about these episodes you wanted to, oh, I should also point out one other thing that my apologies before and maybe you would have reminded me, but this also includes the fact that we find that one of Dedra's colleagues, Lonnie, is actually a spy working for Luthen.
Right.
And it's a great, again, John le Carre scene where they meet, and Lonnie spills some of what he knows about Dedra's operations and the hunt for Cassian Andor and for Luthen for that matter. And Luthen gives this great speech about what has he sacrificed.
Yeah. Extraordinary. I mean,
Yeah.
that really did give me chills.
Yes.
And I think by this time, if you're watching the show and you're thinking, is this worth going through another season of it? Yes, it stays that good.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And this speech in and of itself was, I think, one of the best written
Yes.
scenes in TV. Period.
Yes. No, it's
Right? Like,
fantastic.
yeah, it reminded me a little bit of, in terms of quality and emotional impact and importance, that DS9 episode, Deep Space Nine episode,
Yes. Yes.
duet, where the guy who's impersonating a Cardassian war criminal goes on this rant about how his troops who went and slaughtered Cardassians were had their hands clean because they were washed in the blood of the enemy and so forth.
Mm.
Anyway, it's at that kind of level of, oh my God, this is television.
Oh
This
yeah.
is
Yeah.
so good.
I
And
thought you were going to go for Cisco's "Would I Do It Again" speech.
oh, that too.
Yeah.
Um,
Or even this is my reference point for some reason. Walter White's "I'm the One Who Knocks" speech.
oh yeah, yeah. It's
But
way up there, and
uh,
it's one of those, like, I saw an interview with Skarsgård where he said,
mhm,
I was so worried I was going to screw that up because it
right.
was such a good piece of writing. And this is a show with moments like that. Again, like Star Wars, so often, we want to kind of associate it with thrilling action moments, which this show
Right.
has.
Yes.
But it also, Star Wars hasn't had like those sorts of bits of dialogue in it
No.
at
No.
all, right? Including like Andy Serkis's uh
Yes.
breakout speech when he's like, he doesn't know what to say at first, but then it all pours out of him one way
Yes.
out. There's just one way out.
Yeah. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's the kind of things that you go back to, as I have on YouTube, and rewatch regularly because it's so damn good. Anyway,
I,
Luthen's speech is my favorite.
it's fantastic. I burn my decency for someone else's future.
Yeah.
It's a great. I mean, to the whole thing. I won't read the whole thing,
Yeah.
and I don't have the chops.
I tell my dreams to ghosts.
Yes. Yes.
Oh
Yes.
my God.
Yes. So anyway, all that happens, and then we get into the two-part climax, which is Marva dies, and everyone is trying to. Cassian wants to go back for the funeral. The Empire wants to catch him, and the rebels want to kill him because they're afraid that he can rat on Luthen.
Hmm.
So there's a convergence of characters. Vel and Cinta on the rebellion side. Dedra is there, and of course Cyril still is trying to. He's been told by a friend that he worked with on the original attack in episode 3 that Marva died and probably Andor would come back, and
Hmm.
so they're all there, right? And I mean, I don't even, where would you like to start talking about this 2 episodes sequence?
It was one of the most satisfying conclusions, I think, of a TV
Hmm.
season I've seen. The Marva's speech is again one of those things that you want to replay over and over again.
Yes,
It's so damn good.
yes, it is.
It really shows just how, in a way, the Empire is a little bit clueless.
Hmm.
Kind of just thinks it's going to show up with a lot of guns and shut down any sort of opposition. Which, again, we've kind of written our notes, assuming everybody has seen this already. But
Yes,
it's
yes,
not a
spoilers.
spoiler for folks that doesn't work spectacularly. Doesn't work. And it's a moment when people are making choices. You can see like like a little bit of existentialism thrown in about people are defined by their choices. You have
Hmm.
the collaborator, and you have Brasso and other
Hmm.
people who are
Hmm.
just at that moment. Wilton, it's like, okay, are we really in this? Are we really going to defy the empire in the most noisy, conspicuous, and violent way possible?
Yes. So there are, yeah, there's, again, without getting into, well, the one thing I would point out, so we haven't talked about Saw Gerrera a lot, and I don't, for
Hmm.
time, we probably won't talk a ton about him, but there are several scenes with Saw Gerrera in these various
Hmm.
episodes, including one in the next to last episode where he agrees to go on this attack that Luthen wanted him to participate in, but Lonnie had told him that the Empire knew about the attack, and that if they called the attack off, that the Empire would know there was a high level spy. So Luthen's going to let
Right.
this mission go forward with this Krieger's mission, which we never actually see. But and Guerrero didn't want to participate. Then he decides that he does, and then Luthen basically tells him, "No, you can't participate because, to quote another Star Wars property, it's a
Hmm.
trap."
Right.
Which, of course, this reminds me of the famous World War II story about the what's the code they broke? I can't remember now.
The Enigma code.
Yeah, the Brits had broke this code, but
Hmm.
they and they knew about an attack, but they let the attack take place because they couldn't let the intelligence out that they'd broken the code. It reminded me of that very much.
Hmm.
We also see that the Saw is a bit of a fanatic, and he's at a certain part of the spectrum of the rebellion, right?
Right.
Thoughts about that?
Oh yeah, that this is again, very much, and we'll talk about a lot of this in
Yes,
our second episode. That rebellions aren't monolithic movements.
right.
Yeah, and they're groups that will really have severe differences of opinion with each other.
Absolutely. So then we get the big climax is the funeral scene.
Yeah,
And I will say that because I made reference to before when B2 Emo was all sad about Marva being gone,
yeah,
that was very sad.
it was.
It was very
I
sad, genuinely sad.
He's sort of puppy-like,
Yes,
or
yes,
a small child, and
yes.
and that really worked. I mean,
It
we're
did.
when we did the Star Wars episode, and I expressed my irritation, with C-3PO, like spending too many times, in all three of the original trilogy movies with him, oh, Twitter, oh, what should we do, R2? And attempts to make the droids cute. I mean,
Hmm.
I think here it was something that could have really bombed,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
the emo droid, but it
Hmm.
didn't. It was great.
No, he was fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, he kept reminding me. This is okay. I'll do the Ancient Geeks deep cut. I kept thinking about. Do you remember the movie The Black Hole?
Oh yeah,
And they
yeah.
had those two droids. One was they could
Oh yeah.
float, but one of them was all beat up,
Right.
and that made me kept thinking poor B2 Emo looked like he'd been a little beat up.
Didn't he have like a southern accent or like a Texas twang or something?
I feel like you're correct about that. I haven't seen The Black Hole in a long time.
And I'm not going to see it again for a long time either, if I ever see it. Unless it's part of the schedule for this show that we have to do a black hole episode, then I
Uh,
will. Listeners,
Terrible.
that's how much I'm
That's.
dedicated to this podcast.
I mean, we watched The Legends of Superheroes. I could it get
That's
any?
true.
I
We've
mean, come
abased
on.
ourselves doing that, so why not?
So, so a couple things about this episode I'll point out. One, again, a very touching moment that brought tears to my eyes was when Brasso and Cassian encounter one another in the tunnel,
Yeah,
and Brasso recites what Marva told him to tell him. It was
right.
a very touching,
Yeah,
and again, another very well written monologue. And of course, we have the entire, again, I mentioned the culture. So we see here the Ferrex culture as it pertains to a funeral of a prominent member of the community. The whole thing will be being made into a brick, and the funeral procession. And I do love the bit. And again, it's about the banality of evil to a degree, and also the degree to which if we have power, we can make you do what we want. To where the Imperials are kind of screwing around with the locals. Well, you want the funeral at this time? Oh no, it has to be at that time. You want this many people? No, no,
Right.
no, you can have that many people. And of course, you get this bit of rebellion when they do not start when they're supposed to, and a whole lot more people show up than they're supposed to show up.
Right.
And I think we'll talk about this scene more in part two. But there is this very realistic confrontation between a mob of, or not a mob, but a large group of civilians
Hmm.
and a group of authoritarian law enforcement or military, and the question becomes how much of a confrontation will this actually result in? And of course, this isn't being a massacre, but Marva gives through a hologram a speech about the Empire, and I think it's also one of these great speeches. This show is full of great speeches.
Yeah.
And one that struck me, I did rewatch part of it. She talks about there's a darkness reaching like rust into everywhere around us. We let it grow and now it's here. But the part that got me was it's here and it's not visiting anymore.
Right.
It wants to stay, right?
Right.
Which was a description of what had happened with the Empire taking over for the Corpos, but also about this sort of intense way the authoritarianism sort of grows, and it gets to a point where, like rust, it's infiltrated the very foundation of your
Right.
the frame of the building or the car or whatever, and you getting it out is hard because now it's damaged the structure, right?
Yeah. We've been sleeping. That was
Yes, yes,
the other
yes,
significant thing. It's like just
yes.
people don't want to be conscious of what's happening around them.
That's
And
right.
and again, there's a lot of excitement in this in this episode. There's a lot of cat and mouse.
Yes,
Cassian Andor is there and they're looking for him and he's in hiding and it seems like people are on to him. So as serious as this show is, as mature as this show is, it
yes.
does not lack in excitement at
Oh
all.
no, it's this. Oh yeah, there's so much excitement.
Yeah.
And of course the most significant rom-com meet cute of all time: Cyril Karn and Deidre Mira.
Yeah. Yeah.
At any rate,
After he was already stalking her.
yes. Oh, he's a creep, but you know.
Yeah.
Um, Anything else about season one that we've not mentioned that you wanted to talk about in
No,
this
we got
context?
a lot to talk about in season 2. So
Yes, we do.
that brings us to a slightly abrupt ending to this episode of Ancient Geeks. Thanks for listening. Look for our Season 2 review in the next episode. We originally had recorded this as a single episode covering both seasons, but we decided to break it up to be kind to you, our beloved listeners. You can find Ancient Geeks on the podcast app or platform of your choice. Please subscribe, and even better, tell a friend, and leave a review because we always value the feedback. If you want to contact us directly, drop us a line at someancientgeeks@gmail.com. Look for us on Reddit, Facebook, Blue Sky, and other social media outlets. All content copyright 2025, Tom Grant and Stephen Taylor. Music by Reversed Image, whom you can find on Pixabay. See you next time.